Coming up, a big look at the upcoming SEC championship and a look back on a wild coaching carousel spinning around the SEC with a very special guest. It's all on the way next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to SEC Country Live. I'm Brandon Adams. I'm going to tell you, I have been looking forward to this now for quite some time. I was at the Georgia-Tennessee game, I think, when I got the tweet from our buddy Mike Johnson here that he was ready to make his triumphant return to SEC Country Live. A lot of you are aware, years ago, Mike was our co-host on this show and obviously a terrific analyst breaking down the SEC every week. Always great opinions. Mike now has gone to bigger, better things, big-time coach. He's doing some great things in the world of football, but he said now that his season's over, they wanted to kind of get back involved and be back here for a special SEC championship preview on SEC Country Live. And so, Mike, I am very happy here today to have you with us to be able to do all that.
I'm excited to be back in the house. I mean, I don't think we could have picked a better time to do it. Obviously, with Bama and Georgia lining up, it's been, 3+ years since we've been able to sit at the table together and go over some college football. So a lot of fun things to talk about. Obviously, a very adventurous week in the world of college football, the SEC. I know we're going to do a lot of breaking down of the upcoming game. I know a lot of Bama fans are nervous about what's about to go on in Atlanta this weekend. So happy to be here, man. Missed you.
Well, I missed you there as well. It's great to be back with you again here today. And obviously, we'll take your comments a lot on both Facebook, SEC Country, SEC Country Live on YouTube. And I am kind of curious to kind of get things going here when it comes to the game on Saturday. Listen, I'm a Georgia fan. I've never shied away from saying that. There's a lot on the line for UGA on Saturday because in a lot of ways, for a Georgia team that's trying to get over the hump and win the national championship, it sort of seems like it's never set up quite as well for Georgia as it does right now. Unquestionably, I believe the best team week to week thus far this season. And then Alabama, I would say unquestionably not what it was in 2020, not what it was in obviously previous national championship seasons there as well. This has been a little bit different kind of Alabama team. Then beyond that in the college football playoff, even that seems to set up pretty well, certainly for the winner of this game on Saturday. And since Georgia's the favorite, keep it there for a moment. And yet you still got to go out there and get it done against what has been an arch nemesis and in championship spots in this stadium, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, really a house of horrors, unfortunately, for Georgia against Alabama.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody really knows what to expect. I think obviously when you look at it from the outside looking in, you look at Georgia, the consistency they've sort of had all season. You look at Alabama, they've really had a lot of ups and downs. I think I saw a headline earlier this week. It's like at the same time, Bama, doesn't want to be beat, but at the same time, it's almost like they're begging to be beat. And you kind of don't know what you're getting from week to week. I will say this, and somebody pointed this out to me earlier today. My senior year, 2009, we went in to play Florida, who was a favored opponent in the SEC championship game. Nobody expected us to win. We had a comeback win against Auburn the week before. I think that does, when Bama fans look at the totality of that, kind of breathe some life. But I'd be lying to you if I said it wasn't nervous. If I said, Georgia obviously doesn't look great going into the weekend. Bama, with really a lackluster effort on the ground the last few weeks, you really haven't seen that Bama running game that they've been known for the last 13 plus years. And I think a lot of Bama fans in their heart think that this Georgia team looks like the early Nick Saban teams at Alabama. I mean, I don't think you can argue that. So, I am hopeful this weekend, but I think a lot of Bama fans are holding their breath until those teams hit the field.
I have said before that I think if Nick Saban had his choice, he'd rather be coaching Alabama on Saturday. I should say rather be coaching Georgia on Saturday than coaching Alabama for the reasons that you just mentioned, that it seems like the kind of team that he's put together. And I've also said this, and this is why a lot of these Alabama fans who are watching us are going to be glad to have you to rebut some of this, that when Alabama made the transformation, and Lane Kiffin helped lead this, and Steve Sarkisian was certainly a part of that there as well, that when that transformation occurs, Alabama becomes much more explosive offensively, there's no free lunch in life. That when you get better in one thing, you take attention away from something else. And I do think, and this is where as an Alabama guy, I think your opinion really matters. I do think in becoming as explosive offensively as Bama was with Sark a year ago, Mac Jones at the quarterback, Devontae Smith winning the Heisman Trophy, and obviously, Kiffin years before that, back when you and I were working together before, that there has been a little bit of a loss of that physicality that's made Alabama famous. Now, individually, a guy like Will Anderson as the pass rusher, he's as good as anybody. And there are still, obviously, Tim Smith, there are still big-time players for Alabama on the defense. You still got Evan Neal as an offensive lineman. But even when the healthy running backs are there, this is an Alabama team that seems to have lost some of that physicality, and in a lot of ways, it's kind of become a little bit of a finesse football team. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. Listen, I'm not going to let you say finesse right in front of me. BA's already trying me over here. Look, but I think I will say this, and I think you'll agree with this, and I think you'll like that I say this. I think for the most part, you and I used to talk about it. These teams take on the mentality of their coaches. Mm-hmm. And this has been a less intense version of Nick Saban. I mean, it just has. And I think you start to see that a little bit in the way this team is playing. Nick Saban went on the rant 2 weeks ago about, just being happy for these kids winning games. And I'm all about that. And I love that he said that because I used to be one of his players. But at the same time, he has built the standard. Yeah. I mean, he has spent the last 10 years talking about playing to a standard. And now that is what Alabama, fans kind of expect from their football team. So I look at Georgia. They've taken on Kirby Smart's mentality. Yeah. I mean, he is intense. You've heard the locker room speeches. You've heard all the things he said. And I love it. I love watching them play as a football fan and a football coach. I love watching them play. And I do think you look across the sideline and wonder what version of this Nick Saban football team you're getting at. Because I do think that at times they are elite. I think at other times they are very, very mediocre. So which version are you going to get?
When you were at Bama with Saban in 08, 09, I guess 07, 08, and 09, we should say 3 years of Nick Saban there. Is there any belief that you have that he would have approached your teams the way he's approaching this team right now, which, at least to me, a couple hundred miles away here, seems to be along the lines of, hey, just go out there and have fun.
Right.
Just relax, go out there and have fun. That's the button that Saban seems to be trying to push with this team right now. Do you think he ever would have tried to push those buttons with y'all? It certainly seems like he coached a very different style of football, back then in that portion of his career.
Yeah, well, I think that there's something to be said about it because, and listen, I think that this is a very, very talented football team. But I think at the end of the day, Nick is going to coach what he sees in front of him. And I think he does see a football team that, look, you're coming off one of the best seasons of all time. When you talk about the COVID year last year in 2020, you've had teams that have reloaded. I mean, 2018, 2019, 2020 haven't won titles all those times, but you've had teams that are reloaded. Maybe Nick doesn't see that in this team. Maybe he sees a team that maybe is actually playing better, and their record suggests they're playing better than maybe they even are. You've missed on some 5-star signees that Bama usually never misses on. I mean, you watched Trey Sanders run last week. I think it was timid. You got the announcement this week that Pierce Quick, the former 5-star offensive lineman, is going to transfer. I mean, those are guys that Nick Saban's never missed on. And now all of a sudden, is the cupboard becoming a little empty? You got the thin stable at running back. I don't know. I don't want to say that Nick Saban is different now, but I think he's treating this team differently than we've seen in the past.
So as a Georgia fan, here's the thing that concerns me. And listen, there are a lot of Georgia fans who think Georgia's just going to have a big day on Saturday. But the one thing that would be a little bit concerning for me is there's no doubt that Saban, I believe, is trying to employ some different motivational tactics than he's employed before. How much room do you give yourself to think, hey, maybe this works? Maybe they are relaxed. And maybe pulling out a win against Auburn, even though it's kind of weird that Alabama's playing an overtime game against Auburn, maybe this team finds something to believe in itself because of that. I mean, how much do you allow yourself to think that whatever that Saban's doing right now, he's been a master motivator on both sides of all of this, that maybe this really is the message they need to hear right now of not putting too much pressure on themselves and being the best version of themselves, whether or not it's a carbon copy of what the best Alabama teams have kind of looked like.
I don't even think that I'm allowing myself to think it. I think I'm expecting it.
Yeah.
I think as a Bama fan and a Bama guy, you're conditioned to expect it. Because no matter how many times you look back over the last 10, 12, 13, 14 years, you look at what Bama's went through, what Saban has done, you just expect them to draw up a different game plan and come out swinging in a different way. I don't know what it's going to be this weekend. Are you going to throw more screens? I have to think that you're going to be a little bit more dynamic in the running game. It was very, very vanilla a week ago.
Probably Young himself running the ball.
Correct,
more, right?
Correct. And not only that, but you got Milroe, the backup quarterback or third-string quarterback, whatever he is right now, that really is a running threat in and of himself, a Wildcat style of quarterback. Maybe you see him get reps in lieu of a running game with the running backs. I don't know. But I think that what you're going to see, sorry about that.
No worries.
I think what you're going to see a little bit this weekend is I expect things to just look a little different than they had the last couple of weeks.
I'm going to take some comments. I think you're probably right about that. I'm going to take some comments. Let me kind of wrap up this portion of the discussion by saying this. I do pick Georgia to win, but I do think the game is going to be close. Yeah. Alabama's only lost double-digit points twice in like 7 years, something crazy. And the last time it happened, it was like 2018. Bama's lost a couple of games. Everybody loses games. Yeah. But when Bama loses, it's typically close. I don't have any reason to think, even with Georgia being the number one team in the country, they're going to necessarily overcome that. I do think Georgia wins in a game that probably goes all 4 quarters and requires plays at the end to win it, something that Georgia has not done in any of the last 3 meetings, despite the fact they've had the halftime lead, haven't scored any fourth quarter points.
Yeah.
That's kind of my overall feeling there. You want to give us your kind of overall synopsis of what you think unfolds?
I think it's going to be a tight game as well. I mean, I think that as good as I think Georgia is, and don't get me wrong, I do think Georgia right now is the best team in the country. I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to sit on here, and I know there's a lot of dog fans in the comment section. I'm not going to say that. But here's what I will say. I think Bama matches up well. I think what Bama does well is what Georgia does not do well. I really want to see Stetson Bennett. I mean, let's be honest. They've played some very, very good teams. I think they've played a tough schedule. I really want to see him have to come through in the clutch down the stretch, fourth quarter scoring points, because I think Bama has had to go through that, and you saw it last week. I don't know if Georgia has so much had to do that this year, and I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Stetson Bennett is the guy you thought would be in this position at the end of the season. Maybe some people out there did. I personally did not think this would be the Stetson Bennett show pulling up Atlanta for the SEC Championship. So let's see him kind of come through in those situations. I think it's going to be an incredible game.
I want to get some comments here on YouTube. Our buddy Mike D checks in. He's super happy to have Mike on the show today, and you better believe I am there as well. In fact, he said something in celebration of this that I'm not going to be able to read on air. But nonetheless, I'm super happy. Trey Dukes also checks in to say that he's going to shed a tear to welcome back Mike Johnson. G. Grace Bama Boy says that the team is back together again. And Mike, one of the things you should know is G. Grace was a longtime commenter of ours in SEC Country Live. Yeah. And essentially became a Dog Nation commenter after SEC Country Live. Had a brief hiatus for, we'll call it a couple years. And so he's been on Dog Nation, and obviously he gives Georgia fans grief on there each and every day. So folks are obviously having a great time seeing that today. We'll keep taking these YouTube comments all day long. Also here on Facebook, Brian Abernathy gives you the Roll Tide. He's feeling pretty good about all of that. Teresa Stewart's also happy to see Mike Johnson back on the show today, and I'm happy to have that too. Donald Scott says that Saban's got a winning record against number one teams. And yeah, I mean, listen, there's a lot here. Obviously, Alabama has been a number one team. They beat number one teams. Last time Alabama was a point spread underdog was 2015, blowout win that day against Georgia. I mean, I think, and I'm going to speak to Georgia fans here on this, if you're a Georgia fan and you've convinced yourself that it's going to be easy on Saturday, you may be right, but that's just not a place that I can get to right now. Listen, I hope to be celebrating a Georgia win on Saturday. I am not going to lie to anybody about that, even when Mike's not here. I don't pull the wool over people's eyes and try to pretend I'm some sort of objective guy when that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to just give you my opinion and be myself. I hope to be celebrating a Georgia victory. I do not expect this to be one of those things where you're on roller skates in the second half, just skating your way to an easy win. If you're Georgia, I don't think that's the case, and I do think that Saban and Alabama are going to be heard from in a big way here. Rick Keene checks in to say that Georgia's cornerbacks and safeties need to be on alert. The $1 million quarterback is going to go over the top, obviously referencing the alleged NIL deal for Bryce Young. But when you talk about, where Bama's strengths match up with the Georgia weaknesses, Rick kind of touches on that, right? That for as good as the Georgia defense is, it's still, a pair of cornerbacks that some people think can be had. Now, statistically, they played pretty well, but there have also been some open receivers from time to time, and that's probably the place that if Alabama's going to exploit anything, that's probably what you're going to try to do, right?
I think you've got to hope that that's the game plan as far as Alabama goes for a Bama fan. I mean, you look at their inability to really run the football, and it's just something that Bama fans are not used to. I mean, as good as Georgia's front seven has been this year, any Bama fan in the last, 10, 12 years, other than this year, would say, hey, we're still going to have some success. You look at what they did against LSU, you look at what they did against Auburn, I don't think the running game is going to be there. So what do you put in its place? I think you've got to dink and dunk a little bit and then try to hit them over the top. If you can find big plays, you can make this a good football game. And I think Bama's going to try to do that. I'm really interested to see what the game plan is.
I think that it's probably a lot more Bryce Young on the ground. I think they've been afraid to run with Young too much because I don't think that Alabama feels great about its backup quarterback situation right now, and therefore you can't really put Young in harm's way too much. Well, now it's do or die. Now it's win or go home, at least for the most part. We'll get more into that idea in a moment. And the Georgia defense is so strong in the middle. Defensive line playing as well as maybe any ever has. So a quarterback run, you bring the extra blocker into play. You get away from the middle of the field where Georgia's so strong. That seems to be about as much of a recipe for anything. And to be frank here, and I don't mean dirty plays or things like that. If I'm Georgia, I also want to find out, how does Bryce Young hold up to a game's worth of being battered when that's not something that he's probably had to do a lot this season, at least to the degree that he might have to do it on Saturday. that's one of those things I will be watching and paying close attention to.
Well, and listen, I think the depth at running back is one of the things you look at if you're a Bama offensive coach and you say, listen, we've got to run the quarterback. I mean, we've got to take shots off of Brian Robinson somehow and make it to the end of this game at least. I think they've played a little bit in practice with Slade Bolden, the wide receiver at running back. They've done some things to try to create that depth. I mentioned Jalen Milroe a second ago. He's a third-string quarterback that can be a very, very good top-end running quarterback. But I'm with you. I mean, you look at the Alabama-Auburn game last week. Bama basically in the second half puts in what would be their third-string center. And you cannot tell me going in to play Jordan Davis in this defensive front that playing your third-string center and really what is your backup right tackle is going to be a recipe for success. I don't think that as much as Bill O'Brien probably wants to in his back pocket, I don't see them trying to run right up the middle. You run some counter plays, you run some misdirection, you do some of those things. I don't think for the life of me that they're going to try to put a third-string center one-on-one with Jordan Davis in the middle of that defense and think for a minute they're going to have success.
Ben Moon Mullins, an LSU fan, shows up to say he's happy to see Mike Johnson back today. And Ben, we appreciate you checking in to say just that. Let me turn our attention to this. Georgia is the favorite in the game, so for the sake of conversation, let's say that holds and Georgia wins the game. And let's say it's around the point spread. Let's say Georgia wins for this game by about a touchdown. Alabama, for now, still sits at number 3 in the college football playoff top 25 rankings. Now, in 2019, Georgia was 4th, didn't make the playoff. 2018, Georgia came into the SEC championship 4th, lost the game, didn't make the college football playoff. But Alabama's got the pedigree of having won multiple national championships, including the most recent national championship. What do you think happens if Alabama loses close on Saturday? There's clearly an argument for Alabama being included in the playoff, but do you think that's what's going to happen?
Well, I think obviously you got to look at what else is going to be happening around the country. Does Cincinnati win? Does Oklahoma beat Baylor? I mean, there's a lot of things out there left, and I think that's what you look at because obviously with Georgia, being in that same situation before and losing close games to Alabama in 2018. I don't think the situation is the same around the top 4 that you had back then. This is going to sound tough to a lot of Bama fans, but I don't know that I want Bama to get in at 11-2.
Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know that I want that to happen because
I don't want to be in 11-2. I'm telling you right now.
Georgia fans probably don't want the rematch, but I think you look at Alabama and you look at an 11-2 team and you wonder, okay, is this a team that can go back and win the national championship, getting in the college football playoff? I don't know if they're going to lose by a touchdown or possibly more to Georgia. Now, if it does come down and you're kicking a field goal at the end or you're in an overtime game, I think that's a completely different conversation. But if Bama's losing by a touchdown, Bama's losing by 10, more than that to a Georgia football team, it's probably time for somebody else to have.
Yeah, 10 feels like a lot. That feels like the end of the discussion. But I'll tell you right now that I think that Alabama is for now still part of this discussion. I know this is going to surprise some people by a small margin. I still think Ohio State's part of this discussion a little bit too. Yeah. If you're Ohio State, your argument ends up being, well, only lost to what might be the eventual Pac-12 champion Oregon, or you might say, hey, on the road, in the weather, to Michigan. They probably need a Michigan win in order, to do that, or maybe not. But the point is, there seems to be a little bit of a distaste for Notre Dame right now, a team that at one point I thought, might have a chance to ride Cincinnati's coattails into the playoff. That if Cincinnati was going, maybe they were taking Notre Dame with them. But you heard Gary Barta, the playoff selection committee chairman, on Tuesday night, last night, saying that, hey, without Brian Kelly, I'm paraphrasing here, but this is the essential gist of what he said, without Brian Kelly, maybe we don't want them in the playoffs.
That's so tough.
And that is tough, and we can kind of get more into that if you want to, but all of a sudden that casts a doubt on Notre Dame as a playoff team. I still think this committee doesn't want to take Cincinnati. Maybe Cincinnati will do the favor for them by losing to Houston or playing close enough to Houston where it can be doubted. But if they could exclude Houston, if they could exclude Cincinnati, I believe they'd like to. Oklahoma State's playing well enough now that if it wins, it's probably in. But in normal circumstances, they don't want the Cowboys in there either. So if I'm big brand right now, if I'm obviously Notre Dame because they've only got the one loss, but Alabama, who's not favored to win the SEC championship, and Ohio State, who's not playing in the Big Ten title game, I'm at least still watching the show on Sunday afternoon. I'm at least still tuning in to kind of see how that plays out.
Well, and I think, listen, you talked about Bama's brand, right? Bama's got the history, they've got the brand. To me, I think the brand of Notre Dame kind of plays in the opposite direction because they've been in the college football playoff.
That's true.
I mean, they've been in national championships the last 10 years, and they have not even sniffed a victory in those games they've played in. So I think the brand for them kind of plays in the opposite direction where you're saying, listen, we've seen this same old dog and pony show. No need to put a Brian Kelly-less football team into the playoffs and kind of have that slaughter. I do think it's unfair to the players. I think it's completely unfair to the players. I don't blame Brian Kelly for doing what he did. I think he reached his ceiling at Notre Dame. But I think if you're a player and you're at 11-1 Notre Dame, I think you're looking at it like, you've got to be kidding me.
Can I give an alternate take on that for a moment? Because I'm glad you said what you said, but here's my alternate take on that for a moment. Isn't it unfair to the rest of the players that we're going to put a team in the playoff that is so obviously not winning the national championship? The coach left before the season's done. And I get what's unfair to the Notre Dame players. But I bet the rest of college football that has to stand by and watch this farce occur, as you've said now multiple times, 2018 and again last year, Notre Dame's in the playoff and would have a chance to be in the playoff again this year, even though they have no chance to win the dadgum thing. I sort of feel like that's unfair to a different crop of players.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I mean, you're talking about who's going to be the Final Four in.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about Ohio State's probably in the conversation still. I mean, a non-division winning, 2-loss football team that's lost to a couple other top 10 members. I just find that hard to believe. And so when you put Notre Dame back in that discussion, if it's going to be an Ohio State, if Oklahoma State does lose and Cincinnati does lose, maybe Michigan loses, if it's going to be an Ohio State, you have to look at Notre Dame and say maybe they're more worthy of it.
Last thing on this topic, take Georgia out of the equation for a moment. Do you see another team in the country right now? And Alabama hasn't been great, but they've continued to win. Do you see another team in the country right now that you think could beat Alabama?
I think, well, it's tough to say at this point because I've had my mind focused on Georgia for so long now. I mean, it's been 3-4 weeks, and you're looking at these matchups, and you're going, man, I don't know. Maybe this is not a good thing. Maybe it is a good thing. But I do look at a Michigan football team that I think is very good. I think they've gotten over the hump, and something is scary about Michigan to me in the playoffs, where they've gotten over the Ryan Day, Ohio State kind of hump. It's the first time they've won in God knows how many years. Maybe they're dangerous now. Okay. Maybe they've learned their lesson after all these hard years of, we couldn't get over the hump. I think they're a very good football team. I think, and this is not going to be a popular opinion, I think Cincinnati is a scary football team. I don't think they're going to go in and win against some of the big boys, but I think that they're not a team to be taken lightly. I've been there before. We played TCU in the Sugar Bowl in 2009. Completely different circumstance, but it's not somebody you want to take lightly. They've got NFL talent on that football team that can make you look dumb. But for my money, the national championship is being played Saturday.
I agree.
I think this is the national championship. I think Georgia is set up to make a run if they're able to get through Alabama. And I think this entire football season has culminated in it's for me. It's kind of now or never for Georgia. I think they've got the talent. I think they've got the ability.
You're a big high school football guy. I am there as well. Last week in Georgia, where Mike and I both live, there were 3 number 1 versus number 2 matchups. Even though it was state quarterfinal action. When you don't seed the teams, when you just match up the regions, sometimes you get the best teams playing in the quarterfinals. Yeah. That's essentially what we have on Saturday. It's a national quarterfinal game. Yeah. Now, it's not a guaranteed elimination game for either team, but it is a quarterfinal type game. Sometimes you just have the best 2 teams playing early, and I would say what you just described for Alabama, what I would say on behalf of Georgia here, the toughest competition either side's going to face is what happens here. And really, for either team in the college football playoff, I believe it's potentially anticlimactic unless you were to get the Georgia-Alabama rematch.
I think that's hard for anybody to kind of, especially with all the coaching changes that have been going on. You're not getting the Oklahoma in the playoffs that you would have in years past with all the talent they have. I don't think you're going to get Ohio State in the playoffs. And so I do think you kind of look at it and say, the normal blue bloods that would have been around the country that do have the talent to match up with the SEC champion or the SEC runner-up or whatever it may be, they're just not there. It's not a normal year in college football. Everybody's been able to be beat. I don't think it's fun anymore for a lot of people other than maybe Kirby Smart and Nick Saban to be college head coaches. It just looks like an impossible task at this point to really make people happy in college. So I look around it and it's like I said, for my money, the national championship is going to happen this Saturday in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I can't wait to watch it. I think it's going to be the 2 most talented teams. We'll see who comes out on top.
So Josh Harris, the Facebook comment section, did you not say Utah a minute ago when you talked about playing them in the bowl game?
Yeah, Utah.
Yeah, okay. I think he thought you said TCU. It was like he's taking a bunch of hits to the head. But
listen, we thought for a minute in 2009 we were going to play TCU the year after we played Utah. So TCU actually, I don't know if you remember this or not. So Colt McCoy throws the ball out of bounds against Nebraska, the Big 12 title game. They lost. They went back and reviewed it, put a second back on the clock. If he throws that ball out of bounds, we're playing TCU for the national title. So that's kind of all in the back of my head. Yeah. TCU was number 3, Texas is number 2. Colt McCoy throws the ball out of bounds, 1 second left on the clock. So, listen, easily I could have said TCU. I apologize.
There you go. All right, we're going to do a lot more with Mike. Your comments included. We're also going to talk about a lot of these coaching carousel things. We'll probably come back to the title game before we're done, of course. But let me first of all give a shout out to my friends at Meriwether and Tharp. We say they're your source for Georgia divorce. Obviously, Georgia right there in the heart of SEC country, but really whatever state you're in, Carolinas, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, all across the great land we call SEC country here. If you have a question about the divorce process, Meriwether and Tharp has answers for you on that. Listen, holiday time of year is great, but it's also one of those things that maybe reminds you about a relationship that's maybe coming to an end. Or maybe you think back to the beginning of the year when you said this was going to be the year when you took that step to do what needed to be done. And listen, if you can save your relationship, I think you probably should. But for many of you, maybe you know that it's time to start thinking about something different there on that. And that's where Meriwether and Tharp can step in. The website, theatlantadivorceteam.com, but you don't have to be in Atlanta to take advantage of everything that Meriwether and Tharp can do for you. It's free blog posts, it's podcast, it's an initial consultation with one of their attorneys. It's great answers to important questions about how the divorce process, the law in your particular state, how it impacts your relationship with your children or your finances or things like that. That's what Meriwether and Tharp can do for you. So reach out, find out all about them, theatlantadivorceteam.com for Meriwether and Tharp. Theatlantadivorceteam.com. They are your source for divorce right here around SEC country. All right. So today was the day in which Brian Kelly was introduced as LSU head coach. And he talked about in his introductory press conference how he wanted to be on the big stage with all of that it seems fairly obvious that he left Notre Dame for the reasons that you mentioned a moment ago, Mike, that he just did not feel like he was going to be able to win a national championship there. LSU's a place where the last 3 coaches to be hired in Baton Rouge have all gone on to win national championships. And I don't ask questions about what happened after that because it wasn't always pretty, but there was a trophy in hand for Nick Saban, then Les Miles, then Ed Orgeron. So let me start with this. How do you think the Brian Kelly era is going to play out for LSU?
I think it's a good move for them. I mean, when you look at, I looked at a couple of candidates as far as LSU was concerned. First of all, I thought they might go after Joe Brady, who was the Panthers offensive coordinator. I thought that might
who did a great job in 2019.
Did an incredible job in 2019 when you talk about the season they played. I think he would have been the kind of splash hire that the fan base there would have loved. I think aside from that, Brian Kelly is probably as good as you could have done if you're LSU's athletic department bringing in a coach with that national pedigree, because you're going to recruit against Alabama. You're going to recruit against all these big names in the Southeast. Who can do that? I think Brian Kelly, when you look at it, like I said, he hit the ceiling at Notre Dame. I mean, what are you going to be allowed to do at Notre Dame that you haven't already done? I don't think he's going to get to that playoff kind of run and win a national championship. So he takes the exit. What was he there? 11 years, something like that at Notre Dame. He knows good and well what's around that program. He's getting older. I think he's probably 60 years old at this point.
200-plus wins as a coach. His resume is actually
incredible.
Pretty impressive.
It's incredible. And so I think if you're an LSU fan, you have to be very, very happy with what you got in that coach. Now, what does he do going against Jimbo Fisher and Lane Kiffin and Kirby Smart and some of the names he'll face? Billy Napier down in Florida right now. Some of the names he'll face, I don't know. I think we've seen him against the ACC schedule. They've struggled at times at Notre Dame, but he's won a lot of games there. Time will tell. I mean, I guess my overall point is if you're an LSU fan, you have to be very, very happy at this point and just kind of holding your breath and saying, let's see what happens.
I think a lot of people don't like Brian Kelly. I think for a lot of non-LSU fans, he's just going to be kind of fun to root against. I think LSU fans probably kind of get that too. They like the idea of being, a thorn in the side of SEC teams again. But here's what I can say, though, is that obviously he's had huge problems against very good teams. Blown out in the college football playoff, lost twice to Georgia, although it was close in Athens 2019. Still lost the game, lost both ends of that home-and-home series, lost to Cincinnati in their own stadium here this year. But the one thing they don't do at Notre Dame, they haven't lost to an unranked team in forever. Much the same way that Alabama put a long streak together until the Texas A&M game this year of winning games against unranked opponents. The fact of the matter is Notre Dame's got a pretty nice streak like that going there too. That Kelly is an established coach. So if you think about somebody who brings that establishment credentials, he's buttoned up, he's professional, things probably need to calm down a little bit in Baton Rouge for a lot of reasons. And I think that Kelly kind of brings some of that to you. But you also give him some of the recruiting prowess that LSU's been known for quite some time. We'll talk more about the Florida situation in a moment. But if you're a big-time program, I think if you can hire an established guy where there's a baseline level of success that you kind of know you're going to enjoy, you start off so much higher in the discussion. Like you want to take abject failure off the table.
Yeah.
And by hiring Brian Kelly, you take failure off the table, something that I don't believe can be said for Billy Napier at Florida.
I don't either. And I think that listen, you're talking about a guy who is proven to have played in a national championship game, has been in a college football playoff, situation. I think that you talk about the failures at Notre Dame. Here's my thought on that, especially having been a coach for the last 3 years since we hung out.
Sure.
I think that there is a struggle when you are in a place like Notre Dame that maybe you don't see the elite caliber of talent that you see week in and week out. And I think for a lot of teams it's a struggle because guess what? When you get on the field against the elite talent, oh my God, I've never seen that before. All of a sudden, receivers are flying past you, DBs are coming up jamming you. I think that it's hard to prepare a Notre Dame team to play the likes of what they've seen in those opportunities. So I think having Brian Kelly in the situation where you will see those teams week in and week out, I think he'll be better off in the long run for it.
So, final opinion from me on this topic. I think it's a good hire for LSU, but I do think this stops short of being the kind of thing that leads LSU to a national championship under Kelly, and I'll tell you why. I think Kelly's a proven coach. I think they'll win plenty. But ultimately, this is still, in SEC country, only as good as the coordinators that he brings with him and their ability to understand the SEC. You know, the restrictions on head coaches for recruiting are pretty restrictive. So, you know, it's about how good your position coaches are, how good your coordinators are. Does Kelly, who from my vantage point seems to have a pretty big ego, is he willing to share that level of success? Is he willing to allow coordinators to take a lot of the credit? Because that's what it's going to take in the SEC. Even a place like Alabama, where Nick Saban is the greatest of all time. How much time do we spend talking about Alabama assistants? We talk a lot about Alabama assistants.
Yeah.
That's just what the SEC is. And for a guy like Kelly, who is a total, you know, lost ball in high weeds in terms of being an SEC country, he's got to have guys that can speak the language of Louisiana for him a little bit. He really needs a guy like Ed Orgeron on his staff is what he needs. And I just don't know that he can – I just don't know that he's going to be able to share that spotlight the way that it needs to be done. Ultimately, that's why I believe that Kelly probably stops short of winning a national championship.
Well, I think the question is, first of all, how long of a leash do they give him at LSU? I mean, if you're going to tell me right off the bat he's going to get 5 years, I think that maybe he gets over the hump. I mean, let's be honest. If you tell me that he's going to spend the next 10 years at LSU, I don't think Nick Saban's got 10 years at Alabama. And so I think that hurdle kind of comes out of the way, and, you know, you don't know what you get post Nick Saban. But I will give you credit for something. You brought up a very similar point when Dan Mullen was hired at Florida. And you said, you know, how is he going to mix in with the people of Florida? Is it going to be one of those things that rubs the wrong way? You talked about recruiting a ton back then. Is he used to bringing in these top-level recruits? I think that was his undoing in a lot of ways. When you look at Florida, the Florida fans expected a higher level of recruiting all over the state of Florida than what they got from Dan Mullen. You have to wonder, is Brian Kelly the guy that can put the fence up around the state of Louisiana the way you thought Ed Orgeron would and stop getting guys like Devontae Smith from leaving the state and heading elsewhere to play college football?
For my money, even though it ends up being a disappointing season, I'll still take Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M over Brian Kelly at LSU. If you're saying the Saban era is closer to the end than it is obviously the beginning, if there's an open door in the SEC West, I mean, you know, speaking of recruiting, they just got Evan Stewart, the 5-star receiver, here this week. I know the results on the field are lacking right now, and they still can't find that quarterback, that high-powered offense. I'll take Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M over Brian Kelly at LSU. In terms of someone that takes advantage of a post-Saban SEC West, I mean, Jimbo would be that guy.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you. And you know, they were hired around the same time we talked about Dan Mullen. I was a big fan of the Jimbo hire. And I think that he's shown the ability to obviously get over that hump. I think once you find the consistency that he kind of has lacked, especially at the quarterback position, it seems like the last couple of years, I really think he is going to be very, very good. The problem is, and the same problem for Brian Kelly, it seems like all the teams in the SEC West are good. You're going to face your Mike Leach. You're going to face your Lane Kiffin.
It's amazing.
Sam Pittman has done an incredible job.
It's amazing.
I mean, you add in the fact that in a couple of years you're going to have Oklahoma and Texas kind of walking into that, you know, that bar fight. I don't know. That's why I asked the question. How long does Brian Kelly get before, you know, he's taken out of there?
Chris Walshcott, happy to see Mike Johnson back here in SEC Country Live today. David Sandlin about Brian Kelly says it's an okay hire, but he'd rather he says LSU would have been better off hiring Lincoln Riley. We're actually going to talk about Lincoln Riley about a little bit more in a moment. He says he was shocked that he went to USC. Also, Shannon Burgess says the concerns that I would have had about Mullen at Florida is the concerns that he has about Brian Kelly at Notre Dame.
Good to hear from Shannon.
Shannon Burgess is always in here stirring things up. And I know he's glad to have somebody talk a little Bama with him over here for a moment.
LSU, yeah.
But the point here is I think that Brian Kelly's proven himself to be a better recruiter than Dan Mullen, though.
Well, I think that that's easy to say at this point. But I think that, listen, you're talking about Dan Mullen, who came from a place at Mississippi State that I don't know that you could sell. You know, I don't think he got the buildup that you would have if you're Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. Brian Kelly can go out and sell Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a national brand. You can go out and sell that. I don't know if he was ever given the opportunity because of what it takes to get a Notre Dame. He's not going to have those restrictions at LSU. I think Dan Mullen went from I just got to do more with less to I'll be okay with doing more with less when I get to Florida, and it just didn't turn out that way. He had talent, he had guys transfer in, just couldn't do anything with him. I think Brian Kelly hit the ground running. I think it's got to be a snowball effect, but I think if he can get a good class in early, he's going to have a lot of success.
Commenter mentions Lincoln Riley. Let's talk about him. By the way, this is Mike Johnson. How great is it to have Mike Johnson, the former Alabama All-American, former co-host here with us on SEC Country Live, back with us today. I know it's a lot of fun for me, and it's just hope it's fun for all of you there as well. I trust that it is. But we had a commenter a moment ago mention Lincoln Riley, who there had been rumors connecting him there. You see him taking that USC job, but there had been rumors connecting him to the LSU job. Riley spoke up at his post-game press conference on Saturday after Bedlam saying he wasn't taking the LSU job. He did not let it be known that he was going to take the USC job. And, I mean, to me, it's as simple as this. Riley clearly wanted no part of the SEC. Didn't want to take the LSU job, even though LSU right now is a much better job than USC is. And he didn't want to stay at Oklahoma because eventually Oklahoma is going to be in the SEC. This looks pretty obviously to me like a guy who's running from the SEC. Do you agree?
I don't want to say he's running, but here's what I'll say. This guy, I think he's extremely lucky.
Yeah.
I think he's extremely lucky. Let me put it that way. I think he got in to Oklahoma when he could have at the best possible time, and I think he's getting out at the best possible time. I don't know that he's so much running away from the SEC and saying, I don't want any part of that. But I think he is a guy that, listen, you remember his comments after they played Georgia in the Rose Bowl a few years ago where he says, Georgia, if they're playing in the Big 12, they're not, the number one defense in the country or top 5 defense. I couldn't believe he said that. You were given a month to prepare with a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback in Kyler Murray, and you're talking about Georgia's defense giving up 40 or whatever it was that night. So I don't think he wanted that week in and week out. I think he was very happy to sidestep it and say, you know what, I'm going to go to a blue blood program out in California where I can kind of do my own thing. They're probably happy to have me. I do think I do, like I said, he got in at the right time in Oklahoma with Bob Stoops going out. He kind of just moved into that role. They would have never hired him off the streets. He moved in that role. He found a lot of success on offense, did some good things from quarterback, and he said, you know what? Spencer Rattler's here. He didn't turn out very well. Caleb Williams didn't turn out very well. Maybe it's time for me to go. Maybe the mojo is over that I used to have here. Maybe the offense isn't doing what they thought they would. Let me head out west and see what I can do out there. So scared, I don't know about that, but smart, I'll give him smart. I think he's smart.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't want, as the kids say, if you don't want that smoke, then you want to be as far away from it as you can possibly be. And LA is about as far as that comes on that. And listen, there's no doubt. I mean, he's already got the quarterback, the 5-star that was committed to Oklahoma, has flipped to USC since he's taken that head coaching position. Now, Oklahoma's also saying maybe there's some tampering going on, but nonetheless, he's going to do well with quarterbacks. He's going to do well with wide receivers. They're going to score a bunch of points. But go back to the Nick Saban conversation we were having before. Saban's been going around the last couple of years talking about how much college football has changed.
Yes.
Oh, defense, running game. You're not going to win anything doing that anymore. Well, I think the lack of success at Oklahoma, the lack of success for the fact that Ohio State right now appears more likely outside the playoff than in, a lot of these teams that went full on towards embracing pass first offense at the expense of defense and running game, I think a lot of those, including Lincoln Riley himself, are finding out the sport maybe didn't change as much as they thought it was going to a couple of years ago. Because in the pandemic, nobody played defense. Yeah. Back in 2021, folks are playing defense a little bit again.
And I think there is some merit to that. And I think, listen, exactly what you said is the reason why I think Michigan, when you look at the college football playoff, I don't think Jim Harbaugh so much gave up on the idea of defense at Michigan. I think he said at some point, our defense is going to play into our favor and we're going to be able to still score points and play defense. I think that's what you saw a couple of weeks ago or last week when they played Ohio State. So I do think that Lincoln Riley, to me, it's more about what you said about Brian Kelly, about can he share the spotlight with his coordinators? Can he find people to kind of surround himself with? I don't know that he's that guy. I think that Lincoln Riley likes hearing about Lincoln Riley. I mean, from what I've seen about him and what you know about him, and you see the look on his face, he kind of has that smug kind of look. Yeah. I love what Jim Harbaugh said last week about Ryan Day.
It fits.
He's born on third base and thinks he hit a triple.
That's exactly right.
I think that's what Lincoln Riley is right now. But I don't blame him. I think he's very, very smart in heading out to USC. Like I said, he got in at the right time. He got out at the right time. He's got generational wealth now. Mm-hmm. But I think there is a little bit of that. You know what? I'm Lincoln Riley. My chest is puffed out a little bit. How much do I want to share that spotlight? I'm out in USC. It's California. He's kind of got that California Cliff Kingsbury kind of vibe to him. Let's see what he does. Let's see if he can share the spotlight, and let's see how much he really is able to emphasize defense.
There's a certain kind of thing where, there's a certain kind of play caller, head coach in the NFL. They all have, the scruffy beard type thing. Like Lincoln Riley.
Sean McVay.
Yeah, now Riley doesn't have quite as strong a chin as some of those guys do, but he's definitely trying to do the scruffy beard thing along the rest of some of those NFL offensive-minded head coaches right now. Now, in the midst of all this, Florida also hired a coach this week. We'll talk about that. But first, let's check in with our friends at BetUS and get some thoughts on the big games from the upcoming championship weekend. Of course, when you use the promo code STC125 at BetUS, BetUS.com, you can get 125% sign-up bonus. That's simple language. They're going to put more money in your account to start than you're going to. You put in $100, they're going to put $125. That's $225 you get when you first sign up. They've been taking care of their players for more than 25 years. They're America's most beloved sports book. It's BetUS.com, and the promo code is SEC125. Let's show you some of these games here. I'll give you a couple quick thoughts. Mike, if you've got a quick one you want to give here there as well. Georgia, Alabama, Bama getting the 6.5 here. I'll take Georgia, but I do think that's a lot of points.
It's a lot of points. I'm going to probably stay away from that one, to be honest with you right now. When we're forced to make our picks at the end of the show, maybe we'll do something like that. But I do look at Michigan and Iowa, and I think right now that's a good spot for Iowa. An emotional game Michigan's coming off of. Iowa kind of laying in the weeds. That's a two-point spread. I think that's kind of hard to look at. I think you might see some fireworks there. Also, listen, Oklahoma State coming off a huge emotional win. Baylor is a very, very good football team. I think that they're one of those teams that can kind of jump up and bite Oklahoma State if you're not very careful.
I think I agree with you a little bit there that Iowa may be catching Michigan a little bit of a flat spot after what happened in the rivalry game a week ago. I kind of like Western Kentucky in the Conference USA title game as a small favorite against UTSA this week. I realized that Oregon just got blown out by Utah, a couple of weeks ago. I'm not quite so sure that it's not time to return that favor. Ducks have won the last 2 Pac-12 title games. This is a Utah team that doesn't play great away from home. They lost 7 times away from Rice Eccles the last 3 years. I think Oregon's worth a little bit of a look on Saturday.
By the way, you and I won't have a ton of time to talk about it, but look at the ACC. Where has the ACC gone?
Oh my gosh, completely
Pitt
disappeared.
versus Wake Forest.
That is not a main event.
We would have sat here 3 years ago and absolutely roasted the ACC for about a full hour.
Yeah, that is not a main event matchup when you talk about those two teams, getting together. That total, by the way, on that one, 70 points for Pitt and Wake on Saturday. So those are our BetUS best bets for the upcoming week. Check out BetUS.com and get yourself involved in the 125% sign-up bonus. You're going to use the promo code SEC125. Take advantage of that. SEC, of course, stands for us here on SEC Country. The 125 stands for the 125% sign-up bonus you're going to get there. Check them out today. BetUS.com, promo code SEC125 for a lot more on that. All right, so we are very deep into a show here on SEC Country Live, and we're just now getting to the fact that Florida, one of the powerhouse teams in the SEC, hired a head coach. You see Billy Napier, nothing wrong with the Napier resume, a winner at Louisiana Lafayette, former great assistant at Alabama, successful guy there at Clemson there as well. But man, hard for me not to say that Florida is taking a big L this week with the way in which Lincoln Riley to USC, Brian Kelly to LSU, the way in which this just moves the Napier headline so far down below the fold here. Now, 10 years from now, you may look back and say that Napier's the best of the bunch. But PR exists. It's a real thing. Yeah. I think that Florida has lost the PR war in the hiring of Billy Napier. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think he's a quality coach, and I don't want to say that it all kind of comes down to the PR war, but I think like you said, there is a lot of. Actually, you opened my eyes to that about 5 years ago when you're talking about the PR and you're talking about the PR that comes, especially this day and age. I mean, and a wise person said it to me when I went into high school coaching. Coaching is 50% marketing these days. Mm-hmm. It's about how well you market yourself. What can I do for you? It's not about what you can do for the program. It's what the program can now do for you, especially with name, image, and likeness coming along. It's all marketing. It's all social media. I think there is an aspect of that. But I do have some insight in this, and I think a lot of Florida fans might find this interesting. All right, so Rob Sale, who was one of our coaches or a graduate assistant at Alabama when I was there, he was the offensive coordinator at Lafayette under Billy Napier. Now, he left a year ago and went with Joe Judge to the New York Giants. I spoke to him about Billy Napier when he left, and he said, "You know what, Mike?" He said, "The guy is an unbelievable football coach. He will be SEC. He will be, Division I. He will be Coach of the Year. He will be everything you want him to do. Depends on where he lands, but he's an incredible football coach." I never thought that knowing Billy Napier that he would land a job like Florida. Mm-hmm. And you fast forward a year from when I talked to Rob, and he's up in New York now with the Giants, like I said. And here it is. And here is Billy Napier getting this opportunity. I think he's a great football coach. I think the concern is, first of all, the PR thing. But I think when Jim McElwain was hired down at Florida, Eastern Washington guy, not Western Michigan. Eastern Washington guy, now he's at Central Michigan. You wondered how well he would mesh with the state of Florida. Mm-hmm. This guy's coming from the Pacific Northwest. How well is he going to mesh? Is he going to be able to really get into those recruits' households and say, "I've been where you've been. I'm going to be able to do the same things you"? I think that Napier at Lafayette, being a Georgia guy and kind of has that same kind of southeastern twang. I think he kind of connected with a lot of people he's recruiting. I don't get that vibe at Florida. I don't get that vibe. I think he's an incredible football coach. Like I said, he will do great things. He's going to have to find the talent, and he's going to have to do more with less. And as soon as that snowball stops rolling, what can he do with it? Dan Mullen faced a lot of the same situations. I think he did very good very early. Jim McElwain did good very early, went to a couple of SEC title games. You don't get that same vibe out of Billy Napier that he's going to really come up short in the long run. I hope he doesn't. I hope he has a lot of success at Florida, because when Florida is good, the SEC is much better.
David Sandlin says Florida should have hired Tim Tebow, so there you go on that. Ben Moon Mullen says that he thinks that Napier is going to build a winner there at Florida. Here's the thing that would concern me a little bit, and I said this on Twitter, and of course Florida fans didn't like it, but he's in the state of Louisiana. LSU needed a head coach, and the best that I can tell, LSU didn't lift a finger to try to hire Billy Napier. That's a little bit of a concern. Now, maybe it's LSU that ends up taking a huge L because they had him right there in the backyard and didn't give him the time of day. But if I'm a Florida fan, that would concern me just a little bit.
Well, look, I think that you're going to probably sugarcoat this if you're Florida's administration and say, well, look, we went out for the quality. We didn't go for the splash. We wanted a quality hire. And I think if you're a Florida fan right now, you're kind of looking out there going, who did you want us to get? Who did you want us to hire? There's not really the name out there that you're willing to throw $100 million at.
I don't think Florida will spend $100 million in the coach.
I don't think they will.
Yeah.
And so I think that, and I don't know if it's smart to. I don't know if it's smart to go out and spend the Jimbo Fisher money or the Lincoln Riley money at this day and age if it's not a proven coach. So if you're Florida right now, you're looking at going, who did you want us to go get? There's just not that guy out there right now.
Now, I will say this. Blake Robinson on YouTube says, poor Napier, I feel sorry for him because he's a damn good coach. Florida's going to be the death of him. Here's the one thing I will say is, I mentioned before that I don't think Florida wants to spend $100 million in a coach. I believe that's true. Florida's been a frugal program in comparison to some in the SEC. But that is changing some. Scott Strickland, the athletic director, is overseeing a big investment into facilities. That's one of the reasons why Dan Mullen's gone, is because when you're asking boosters to pony up and make big donations, those boosters have some requests to go along with that money. So I think that Napier actually probably inherits a Florida program right now it's more committed to winning than maybe the one that Dan Mullen inherited a couple of years ago is. And I'm more than happy to tell you that I think there's a chance that Billy Napier wins really big at Florida because the resume is a strong one. But every group of five coach that makes the big jump up, they all have strong resumes. They were all once successful assistants. They were all once successful head coaches at the group of five level, but not all of them achieve when they move up to the big job. And here's the thing. I know this sounds like concern trolling from a Georgia fan to a Florida fan, but hear me now, believe me later. Florida has failed 3 head coaches in a row.
Yeah.
You do not want to see the state of that program if you fail for a 4th consecutive time with your head coach. Will Muschamp could recruit, couldn't win. Jim McElwain couldn't do either. Mullen won some games, but could not bring in championship-level recruits. It's been a different recipe slightly each time, but it's still coaches that Florida was happy to move on from. If Napier ends up in that same category, and there's at least a percentage chance that he will, all of a sudden you start thinking about the great success of Florida under Urban Meyer, under Steve Spurrier. That seems like distant history. All that stuff that Florida fans do to make fun of Georgia with the 1980 jokes about winning the national championship, it'll actually be Florida forced to live in the past if things for Napier don't work out.
I think that's hard to argue with. But I do think that there's a point. And look, when they hired Will Muschamp, and Will Muschamp we had just played in 2009 when he was Texas' defensive coordinator. And I think it was a splash hire. I think a lot of people looked at it and said, oh my God, what an incredible hire. Will Muschamp, he's the second coming. He's a Saban guy. He's been around all these good programs. He's been with Mac Brown. He's been around all these coaches that know how to win. It just fell flat on its face. And so I do think there is some merit to Florida saying, you know what, let's go look at the quality of actually what this coach is able to do. And here's another thing. If I'm a Florida fan and Georgia fans talking back and forth, Napier knows Kirby Smart. I mean, he knows Kirby Smart from his time at Alabama, from his time being around the Southeast, from his time being around some of those same programs. I think that he has a pedigree that looks at what Kirby Smart has built and kind of knows that program and kind of knows what it takes and knows kind of how Kirby Smart's gone about doing it. So I think this is just a wait-and-see approach. I don't hate the hire for Florida. I don't know if it's a home run, but I don't know who else I would rather them go get.
Can you believe how quickly it comes to an end for Mullen? Because you mentioned this earlier. Obviously, there were a ton of recruiting shortcomings for Mullen, and that became more and more pronounced as time went on, including this year. But this is still a guy that had been multiple top 10 seasons, won the SEC East a year ago. Have you ever seen something completely dissolve into thin air the way that did this year? It almost seems like this Florida team just quit on him.
It's tough. It's tough to see, and especially when you had the success that you feel like he had last year. I mean, he was within a touchdown of beating Alabama, one of the best football teams, in my opinion, of all time. He goes wire to wire with them in the SEC championship game, and you think, oh man, this guy is setting up for a long run. He's won some good football games, But boy, it's almost like it almost feels like the Gene Chizik, Ed Orgeron kind of thing, where it's like, boy, when things really went south, when he lost his players that he kind of came in with, boy, they really went south. I mean, it was like, it almost feels like there was a disconnect between the head coach and maybe the strength conditioning program, where they're just not expecting as much. They're not developing the players like they did in the past, because all three of those guys I just mentioned, one with the old coach's players, where maybe they were better X's and O's wise, but just couldn't get it done in the long run and have the talent.
Chadrick Shane Pike mentions Mark Stoops, says, so glad Kentucky could hold on to him. Let's talk about that for a moment. Stoops does sign the extension to stay there. Last name put him kind of in the conversation for the Oklahoma job a little bit. He was also kind of a candidate, at least it seems like the rumor mill would have you believe, at LSU. Are you surprised that Mark Stoops is staying in Kentucky?
This is perfect time to talk about this, because I think these two stories are intertwined, in my opinion. Don't you feel like that Mark Stoops looks at Dan Mullen, the situation that he was in? Dan Mullen could have stayed at Mississippi State for 30 years.
Yeah.
They would have loved to have had him for 30 years. Goes to Florida, spends a couple years, they don't want him anymore, he's washed up. Mark Stoops has got to be looking at that situation going, boy, I really don't think that looks that good. You know, it might really look good to go make the splash higher, but in 3 years, am I going to be happy that I left Lexington, Kentucky, and went somewhere else that I really didn't have a chance to win at? I think he's smart in kind of playing it that way.
I think you're right about that. And first of all, it sounds like Kentucky, which already has pretty good facilities, they're ready to kind of maybe invest even more in football. But think about this for Mullen for a moment. I mean this seriously. So he's at Mississippi State, which is maybe one of the lower tier SEC schools, but a middle tier job overall.
Yeah.
Leave that to go to Florida. Do you think Dan Mullen could get the Mississippi State job back today?
I think they'd love to have him.
I don't know.
They'd love to have him.
Maybe later.
You're talking about a Mississippi State with a Mike Leach, though. And, I don't think it's any secret that Mike Leach probably doesn't want to stay in Starkville long term. But I think if Dan Mullen goes to Mississippi State, I messed up. Let me sign a long-term deal. I'll stay here for forever. I think they would love to have him.
You may be right, and maybe after time that becomes more apparent. I kind of get the feeling, at least for right now, the way that it ends for Mullen in Florida has tarnished him a little bit. And that goes along with what you were saying about Mark Stoops a moment ago, that if you're Stoops, you're watching all of this. And it seems like he has a lot of reasons to be happy at Kentucky. They've won a pretty good bit. He's got a pretty good pipeline for talent there, kind of southern Ohio into Florida a little bit. He's kind of figured out a couple of recruiting scenarios that seem to work out pretty well for him. And you're a coach, you understand this. I'm in a stage in my life with a wife and kids where you don't really want to mess with Happy. That you can't make a 10 into a 12. That okay, I'm going to go get the dream job here, but I've only had it for a few years. By all intents and purposes, it seems like the entire experience is pretty miserable. You and I talked about this years ago. That I think that Mullen probably had to be coerced to even take the Florida job.
Yeah.
And I think in retrospect, he probably looks at that as a mistake. And if Stoops was watching that closely, I think he made the right decision.
Well, listen, I think it all comes down to, for Dan Mullen at least, and maybe for Mark Stoops, I think it comes down to money. I mean, I think when you're Lincoln Riley and you look at the situation, you go, man, I hate to leave Oklahoma. It's a blue program. My grandkids are going to be wealthy. You're talking about $100 million. I think if Mark Stoops is looking at the situation, he goes back to Kentucky and says, look, I don't want to leave, but y'all have got to do something to help me out here. And I think they've continuously done that. When he's had good years, they've given him raises, they've made him feel loved. And I think as long as they continue to do that, I think Lexington, Kentucky is a great place to live.
So I think also in the standpoint of money, like there's a huge difference between like $1 million and $5 million. But I don't know there's a huge difference between like $50 million and $100 million. You know what I'm saying? It's twice as much money. But at a certain point, it's just more money than you can spend in a lifetime. At that point in time, like how much more different really is it? So from that standpoint, I think Stoops probably makes a pretty good decision. And then around that with the rest of the SEC, we'll look at some of these first-year coaches for a moment. It's an interesting landscape in the league right now because go back to the pandemic year of 2020. You mentioned Leach a moment ago. He steps in here. Obviously, Lane Kiffin starting his time at Ole Miss. Sam Pittman, who I think has been a real revelation for what he's been able to do at Arkansas. And then following in the footsteps of those guys from 2020 at the first-year crop of this year. Shane Beamer at South Carolina, a real pleasant surprise, I'd say. Josh Heupel at Tennessee, I don't mind telling you, way better than I thought Tennessee had any right to be. Brian Harsin at Auburn, I want to get a thought from you on that there in a moment too. I mean, what do you think about these guys that kind of stepped in? Different levels of success. I think different level of approval from their current fans right now. What do you think of that crop of coaches that just came into this league?
Well, I think first of all, you look at Beamer in South Carolina, you're probably lucky to keep him in the future.
I think you're right.
I think he's a guy that, you look at South Carolina, you look at obviously what's going on at Virginia Tech and some of the other openings around the country. I think he is a premier coach. I think you're happy to have him at South Carolina. I think you try to keep him there as long as you can. I'm with you. When you look at Heupel, I mean, that's got to be the guy that Oklahoma's looking at. Obviously he's got that background with them. He is much better. And you look at the first half of Tennessee games this year, it is clear that they were tit for tat in the first half with a lot of the teams they played this year. Ran out of gas in the second half, much like against Alabama. I think the same, kind of the game against Georgia where they ran out of gas at the end of the first half. But when you look at some of the games they played schematically, he was matching up with the best of them. And while we're talking about coaches, I mean, you talk about Sam Pittman. I'm a huge fan of Sam Pittman. We talk about an offensive line guys that understands the grittiness and understands the toughness it takes to play in that league. Huge fan of all those guys.
Well, here's what I like about Pittman. And I don't want to lose your train of thought, but I want to say this. I like guys who are relaxed and having fun, having success. I mean, listen, Nick Saban, gold standard. You can't help but say that. But the fact that there may be some room for a guy that's kind of a guy that's relaxed and willing to have a little bit of fun in life.
You just know he's drinking bourbon after the game. He's swishing the cup around.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's some room for a guy like that having some success, and I kind of enjoy that.
Yeah, I do too. And listen, we've obviously I'm a high school coach now. I've had some of these coaches that have rolled in from some of these different programs. I think Satterfield was at our school today, kind of recruiting some of our kids. You look at these coaches, and you do want to see that. You want to see the guys that are happy. I don't know. Listen, I don't know a ton about him. Brian Harsin doesn't seem like that guy to me, though. I mean, he seems like he is just as straight-laced as he could possibly be when it comes to that Auburn program.
He doesn't seem like he's fitting in at all.
Now, Auburn, I will say this. I think the Gus Malzahn thing kind of worn out on a lot of Auburn fans, where it's kind of had to twang to him and kind of talk like that. I think that really wore him. So maybe they're happy about the Brian Harsin, kind of straight-laced, kind of to the point. But I'm with you. I think once that gig is up, I don't think there's any charm left to keep him around. You know what I mean? Once that gig is up and he's trying to play that brand of ball that he's trying to play,
I get the
once
impression
that goes away, is like, I don't really like
I get the impression that if Harsin got a job offer today, they'd waive the buyout and just let him leave.
I don't think there's any doubt about it. And there was whispers about that, and I'm sure y'all probably covered that, about the Washington opening and some of the West Coast stuff. He does seem like a West Coast guy. Listen, I'm not saying that he won't turn Auburn into a national title contender, but I think he's got a lot of work left to do, and I wonder if he's going to have that window to be able to do that.
And then for a guy like Mike Bobo, they obviously moved on from him. It's like, you hitch your wagon on the wrong guy, you end up on the job market again. But that's just kind of what happens there for a guy like Harsin. That maybe he's back in 2022, but if I had to bet right now, I don't know that I'm betting on Brian Harsin. And I'm not even going to get into all the vaccine stuff and stuff like that. It's just a different topic for a different show. But I have a hard time imagining Brian Harsin coaching Auburn in 2023, which is 2 seasons from now.
Yeah, and it is interesting, too, when you talk about the Mike Bobo thing. And isn't it funny how you kind of look around the SEC, and doesn't it seem like we recycle these guys over and over again as far as coordinators in the SEC? I mean, you see it with defensive coordinators. You talk about the coordinators at Florida, they got let go midseason. I mean, I've heard the name Chip Lindsey come up for Georgia Tech staff, and I just kind of giggle at that because it's like, man, how many times are we going to hear the Chip Lindseys, the Rhett Lashleys, the Mike Bobos, and guys like that just kind of get sorting around the SEC? But I think that he is the right guy in the right time for Auburn. Obviously, you saw that they played very, very hard for him a week ago.
Yeah.
So into year 2, I think that's going to be a better look at it and kind of see if his players are really playing hard for him.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll take a couple more comments before we get ready to wrap things up here today. Teresa Stewart checks in to give you a go Tennessee. And I said this before. I mean, Tennessee, the roster was depleted. And yet Josh Heupel's really brought that's what you want to see a program do. Bring a personality, bring a style into the league. And Heupel's clearly done that. They actually played better on defense. I thought they had any right to. I think that Shane Beamer's done that too. There are some people who think that Shane Beamer may be a little put on, a little bit. There may be a little phoniness to that game there. But honestly, it works on me. I think he does truly love South Carolina. He didn't flinch seemingly this offseason when the Virginia Tech job came open. Yeah. That's 2 coaches that I could kind of see sticking around. And a lot of folks immediately kind of wondered, well, does Heupel get involved in the Oklahoma conversation? Seems like that's not going to happen. There's even been some chatter, does Shane Beamer get involved in that conversation? I agree with you that South Carolina may still have to fight to keep him over the course of the long term. But those are guys that have defined themselves in a way that Brian Harsin in year 1 just didn't do.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And listen, I think that when you talk about some of these coaches and you talk about some of the direction the SEC will be going in the coming years, you do wonder. I mean, a guy like Shane Beamer could find himself at, when you go to 16 teams in the SEC, he could find himself ranked as the 10th best head coach and still be a very, very, very good head coach. And I think that's what I think a lot of these programs are going to have to come to terms with that. I think you're going to have a South Carolina or some of the upper third kind of programs or the middle tier programs that might all of a sudden turn into a Kentucky, a Mississippi State style of program in the SEC. Is a guy like Shane Beamer going to be okay with that for the long run? I think is the question you're going to have to ask.
Christopher White says, going back to the Florida thing a moment ago, they wanted a coach they could control. That's why they didn't try to make a big splash with a well-known coach. It is interesting. There are some programs where the AD is just a little bit more famous in other places. For a long time, when Jeremy Foley was AD at Florida, he was a big name on that campus, even though they had big-name football coaches at the time. Scott Strickland's profile may not be quite so high around there now, but Florida does seem to be a little bit more of an AD-centric program than other places are. I don't necessarily disagree with that.
No, I don't disagree with that at all. There's just places where the AD. And I was thinking this the other day about Notre Dame when Brian Kelly leaves at Jack Swarbrick. That's a Notre Dame AD if I've ever heard one. You have those guys. Ohio State seems to be a place like that as well, where you always hear about the AD's comments, and a lot of it maybe it's because these ADs are on the College Football Playoff Committee, but I do think Florida is one of those places. I think Texas A&M's always been a place like that where you're going to hear from it. I think Florida State with the Seminole Boosters Inc. is going to be a place like that. So you're going to have these places where the coaches are going to have people breathing out. Texas, by the way, that's a big one. Texas, I forgot about that. Yeah. That's somewhere where you're going to have to hear from upstairs.
By the way, Blake, you're right about that. Robinson over here on YouTube about Auburn and Brian Harsin says there's still a lot of attempted sabotaging of Harsin going on behind the scenes with the usual power brokers. Like, how many years in a row this has been Drew? Yeah. Like, Auburn football is like this Yellowstone style like drama series where there's just all kinds of like backstabbing and stuff going on all the time there. So from Blake Robinson's standpoint, that's still kind of going on. All right, we'll get a final thought from you on the SEC Championship in a moment. Mike Johnson, so thrilled to have him here as a part of what we're doing here today, and so thrilled to have all of you with us there as well for Coaching Rumor stuff and SEC Championship preview and everything else in between. But let's also kind of close at the show in kind of a lighthearted way. We call it our SEC LOL, where we give you just some random thing that's happened in the SEC. So Mike Leach is getting interviewed here, and apparently Leach almost falls down right before the interview, and he is greeted by the person doing the interview and then proceeds to go on one of his difficult to tell where this is all going rants, but this is sort of classic Mike Leach. It just came out this week. Another example of what makes Leach an LOL seemingly each and every week. Here is the Mississippi State head coach.
Are you okay after the fall?
Well, I thought it was a step, and it's a good thing I have quick reactions, and due to lightning quick reactions and to be perfectly honest, observing my players over and over, I was able to avoid catastrophe as I stepped out that stage, and I reacted as I'd seen my players react. I mean, in that split second, I thought to myself, what would my players have done in that situation? Boom, boom, boom. And then immediately it mobilized, and I was fine, okay? And so I'll tell you what, that just shows that you spend time with great people who are doing great things, some of it will rub off on you, because that was better than I deserved, because a lot of people would have eaten it in that situation, but not me. I was blessed by the people that I get to deal with.
So that's probably enough of Leach there. Look, he's funny. I get that. But that's more joshing around than I can have you do after you just lost the Egg Bowl. I mean, can we agree on this, that there's a little – something about Leach for me is just a little too casual.
I think that's just the way Mississippi is. I mean, you look at Lane Kiffin against Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss are playing Alabama. The game's starting to slip away. Lane Kiffin makes a comment to Lee Corso on the sideline or something. It was one of the games they were playing. He makes a comment, and it's like, boy, do you really want that looking like that? You're kind of laughing it up. Lee Corso mid-play call, when it's kind of going on. But I look at Mike Leach, and I'm like, that just says, I had him on my radio show like 3 years ago. He's on the phone doing the interview, and he's saying hello to everybody he's passing on the street. And he's walking down the street going, hey, how's it going? Yeah, and then I won this game, and hey, man, how's it going? And it cracked me up. That's just who he is, and I think Mississippi State fans love him for that.
Yeah, no doubt about that. All right, final thought from you, SEC title game. How do you think it plays out on Saturday?
I think it's going to be a very, very close game. I'm not – when I was coming in here, I thought about when you and I first started doing SEC Country, 2017, Aaron Murray picked Mississippi State over Georgia. Do you remember that? It was like one of those things that people were just – and I think Georgia won by 30. Right? So I think it's going to be a very, very close game. I'm as nervous for this game as I've ever been a Bama game since I left. I think that's fair to say. I think Georgia is a quality football team. The
I ain't gonna be nervous though. You guys have won 1,000 championships. Can you just let us have one title? Can we just have one title
I'd be
here?
nervous of losing. I mean, I'm not. Listen, I'm not gonna be heartbroken afterwards. I'm gonna wake up, and get my kid out of bed and do whatever I got to do Sunday morning. But the thing is, for the life of me, I can't talk myself into picking Georgia. I just can't do it. I think when I look at it, I think it comes down to the final seconds. I would never say this in any normal circumstance. Any sane Bama fan would never say this. Maybe it comes down to a Bama field goal. It's the first time we've had a good field goal kicker in God knows how long.
Right.
And Will Reichard's a good. Maybe it comes down to a Bama field goal.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect anything different. I don't think you should pick against your alma mater.
Bama by one. Bama by one.
I've said this on some of my shows too, where it's like, listen, there's no mystery to what I'm going to pick here. Even if I thought Alabama was going to win, I'd lie and pretend that wasn't the case. I'm not picking Alabama going into a game like this, and nor should any fan base, do that at all there. So, good game on Saturday, and I tell you, a great way to get us started for all of that. Thanks for being here on SEC Country Live today. It's great to be with you again.
It's good to hang out, man. I missed all you guys in the comments.
Yeah,
section.
terrific comments here today there as well. So much fun to be able to do that. We'll see you back here again next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, Facebook and YouTube for SEC Country Live. Y'all enjoy the conference title games this weekend, Dogs and the Crimson Tide. Follow these coaching rumors where they're going to continue to go. And, of course, we will see you back here again next time. Have a great afternoon, everybody.